What was the weakness of the Mongol warships when the Mongols invaded Japan in the 13th century AD? In the latter half of the 13th century AD, Kublai, the fifth emperor of the Mongol Empire and the first emperor of the Yuan Dynasty in China, took control of Goryeo in Korean peninsula and set his sights on the island nation of Japan, which lay beyond the Goryeo, invading it twice, in the Battle of Bun'ei in 1274 and the Battle of Koan in 1281. In this video I will focus on the first Mongol invasion of Japan, the Battle of Bun'ei in 1274. The truth about the Battle of Bun'ei. The Yuan Dynasty, which had been preparing for the invasion since 1273 AD, sailed from Happo, present-day Masan, on the Korean peninsula on November 9, 1274 AD, October 3, Bun'ei 11, in the lunar calendar, and after overrunning Tsushima province and Iki province, approached the Matsura coast of Hizen province. After several raids, they began landing in Hakata Bay on November 25, 1274 AD, October 19 in the lunar calendar, Bun'ei 11. The military forces consisted of a large number of Goryeo officers and soldiers, mainly from the Yuan forces, Mongols, Han Chinese, Jurchen people, Khitan people, etc. However, November 26, 1274 AD, October 20, Bun'ei 11 in the lunar calendar, the Yuan forces that had appeared in Hakata Bay the day before during the Battle of Bun'ei retreated. Why did the Yuan forces, which had swarmed into Hakata Bay, retreat overnight? According to popular belief, it was due to the stormy weather that later led to the kamikaze ideology. But what was the actual situation? There are many theories, but from a scientific point of view, the following causes can be considered. Mongol Emperor Kublai's reckless orders. After suppressing the rebellion of Sambyolcho, the military organization of Goryeo, the Yuan Emperor Kublai ordered an invasion of Japan, which continued to ignore his demands for submission to Mongol Empire, Yuan Dynasty. In 1274, Kublai finally gave the order to invade Japan, and the Yuan strictly ordered Goryeo to build 300 large warships, 300 small landing craft, and 300 surface ships within 6 months, and also conscripted more than 30,000 carpenters and engineers. However, building such a large number of warships alone would have been extremely difficult considering the amount of wood required, the construction period, and the number of carpenters and soldiers. Based on the existing old ships, Benzaisen ships, a large cargo ship developed during the Edo period in Japan, old sailing ships, Yuan warships found on Takashima Island in Nagasaki Prefecture, and Goryeo ships in the Korean Maritime Museum, the following conclusions can be drawn. The amount of wood used per ship is almost half that of the logs. The estimated amount of wood used per large warship is about 500 cubic meters. To secure this amount of wood, a forest the size of about 150 Tokyo domes would be required. For 300 ships, that's 150,000 cubic meters. The area of forest needed to obtain that much lumber would be the size of 45,000 Tokyo domes. Also, referring to Benzaisen ships, a large cargo ship developed in the Edo period, if we include the number of ship carpenters needed for construction, the men who work under the direction of the ship carpenters, and the people involved in transportation, as well as the people who take care of their lodging and meals. A total of about 60,000 people would be needed in one day, which is quite a large number considering that the population of Goryeo at that time was about 2.5 to 4 million. Extremely short construction period. The type of ship that was available. There were also problems with the construction period and process. In terms of the shape of the ships to be built, it was technically difficult to build a ship with a narrow bow and many bulkheads like the Song Dynasty ocean-going ships. In addition to this, it is believed that the lack of time led to the adoption of the simple Goryeo-style riverboat format. So, what kind of ship was the Goryeo-style riverboat? As a clue to the shipbuilding by Goryeo in the 13th century AD, there's a large Goryeo warship called Bun'ei No. 3 that was excavated in China in 2005. This ship, built in the 14th century AD, is box-shaped with few curves, and wooden nails were probably used for the main connections. Wooden pegs are only about 1/5 as strong as iron pegs, and in addition, they need to be precisely aligned by carving mortises into each other, which takes time to build. The Bun'ei No. 3 is considered to be a hybrid of a Chinese ship and a Goryeo ship, and is characterized by the fact that it had bulkheads in its hull structure to increase its strength, just like a Chinese ship. It is possible that Mongolian warships had a similar structure. In November and December of 2017, a large number of North Korean fishing boats were swept away by northwesterly winds and drifted into the Sea of Japan side of the Japanese archipelago. That ship shape is easy to make because of its simple shape with a narrow bow but a flat bottom. In extreme cases, it can be said that the bow part of the river boat from the Goryeo dynasty was simply made thinner. In comparison, the wasan, the traditional Japanese ship from the Edo period, has a V-shaped bottom instead of a flat bottom, and its propulsive performance, wave cutting, and stability in waves are no different from modern ships. It is clear that a flat-bottomed ship is not a shape for navigating the ocean. Estimating the full extent of the former warship fleet in the late 13th century AD, Yuan's order to Goryeo to build warships was an extremely difficult order in terms of the amount of wood used as materials and the number of personnel. In terms of scale, it would have been impossible for Goryeo to build 300 large warships in 6 months. Therefore, it is estimated that the actual size of the Mongol fleet was about 300 warships, including large and medium-sized warships. Formation of the Yuan military fleet. Warship. Newly built large warships, about 150. Medium-sized warships acquired by the Yuan Dynasty when they subdued the Goryeo military organization. Sambyolcho. About 150 ships. Military personnel. Crew per ship. Large warship, 120 soldiers and logistics personnel, 60 sailors, total 180. Crew per ship. Medium-sized warship, 95 soldiers and logistics personnel, 19 sailors, total 104. Asterisk estimated from the records of the Yuan Dynasty when they attacked Sambyolcho. Total, about 44,000, of which about 26,000 are actual combat soldiers. The above is an estimate. From the testimony of Mongolian prisoners of war, it is estimated that there were up to 5 war horses per ship, and 700 to 1,000 war horses in the entire Yuan fleet. In a typical forces formation, if there are 100 troops, 3% of the troops, or 3 commanders, will be mounted and in command. In the era of Genghis Khan's rise to power, from the late 12th to early 13th century AD, the Yuan forces had more horses than soldiers, and was what could be called a cavalry forces of nomadic tribesmen with excellent horsemanship skills. However, in the late 13th century AD, the Yuan forces at the time of the expedition to Japan was a multinational and multi-ethnic forces, and was organized in the same way as a typical forces formation. Therefore, the Yuan forces would have been transformed into forces that did not deserve to be called a nomadic cavalry forces with excellent horsemanship. It is also estimated that most of the infantry were Goryeo soldiers. This is because some of the sub-commanders were Goryeo officer. Since it was impossible to give orders in battle without being able to speak the language, a Goryeo officer was needed to command the Goryeo soldiers. In other words, it seems that what actually fought was a hodgepodge of infantry corps, with many hired Goryeo soldiers mixed in among the Yuan forces. If we think about it in this way, there seems to have been more than a little gap between the reality of the Yuan forces that attacked Japan and the common belief that the Mongolian cavalry attacked single Japanese warriors in groups. the waves of the Tsushima Strait that shook the fleet and morale of the Yuan forces. By the way, the human ear has otoliths to detect tilt, and the semicircular canals to detect rotation. The signals of the body's inclination and rotation are sent to the brain to control the muscles. Therefore, the otoliths and the semicircular canals are connected to the autonomic nervous system, which controls respiration and circulatory organs. When the human body is accelerated by the jolting of a vehicle, the autonomic nervous system is affected through these organs, resulting in feeling sick, nausea, and loss of appetite. In the case of a ship, the rocking causes vertical acceleration, which leads to seasickness. There are two types of ship shaking: short period shaking 0.5 to 80 Hz and long period shaking 0.5 to 0.1 Hz, and it has been found that more people get sick from the long period shaking. This graph shows the change in vomiting rate with vertical acceleration and period during a 1-hour ride on a ship. The vertical acceleration value indicates the force applied up and down, which is equal to a percentage of your body weight. 0.1 grams is 10%. This shows that seasickness occurs when the period of rocking is around 4 to 5 seconds and the vertical acceleration is about 0.1 grams. Cars have a short shaking cycle of less than a second, so few people get carsick, but boats have a long shaking cycle, so many people get seasick. According to the standards for ship ride comfort set by ISO, International Organization for Standardization, the recommended value of vertical acceleration for an 8-hour ride on a ship is 0.025 grams or less for a 3 to 10 second rocking cycle. If the vertical force is more than 2.5% of your body weight, you will get seasick. In addition, the standard for cruise ships for long periods of time is a vertical acceleration of 0.02 grams or less and a lateral sway angle of 2 degrees or less. So, what was the level of rocking of the Yuan warships during the Battle of Bun'ei? It is basically the wave period that determines the rocking of a ship. The wave period in November in the Tsushima Strait is 6 seconds, average wave height 1.1 meters. The magnitude of vertical acceleration is proportional to the shaking angle and inversely proportional to the square of the shaking period. If the shaking period is shorter than the shaking angle, the acceleration will be larger. However, the longitudinal oscillation varies greatly depending on the speed of travel and the direction of the waves. Also, ships have their own natural vibrations, and when these vibrations are close to the period of the wave vibrations, they synchronize and become larger than the waves shaking. In addition, the fact that more than half of the Yuan warships were shaped like river boats without a wave-cutting structure, which lacks stability in waves, is also thought to have increased the shaking. Taking into account the swaying characteristics of such a Yuan warship, we assumed the swaying angle to be 1 meter in wave height, and calculated the swaying period and vertical acceleration when sailing at a ship speed of 3 knots. As a result, the Yuan warship exceeded both the vertical acceleration of 0.02 grams or less and the angle of lateral sway of 2 degrees or less, both of which are the standards for seasickness in long-term boarding. Therefore, we can see that the Yuan warships were clearly in the seasick zone during the voyage, except when it was calm. In this condition, if the vertical swaying continues for an hour, unless you are a strong seafarer, you will surely get seasick. In the Yuan warships, most of the soldiers other than the sailors were of continental descent, so they had little experience on board and were probably not used to ships. The effects of seasickness are even greater when many people are crammed into a small space on a ship for a long period of time, and it is thought to have strongly caused nausea, vomiting, and loss of appetite. This deprived the soldiers of their physical strength, and by the time they landed in Hakata Bay, at a conservative estimate, about 1/3 of the total number of soldiers may not have been able to fight satisfactorily. The Tsushima Strait and the Genkai Sea were major obstacles for the Yuan forces. As you can see, The Yuan forces was actually at a great disadvantage even before landing in Hakata Bay. Where did the Yuan forces land in Hakata Bay? Regarding the landing site of the Yuan forces at this time, the famous history book of Temple and Shrine, Hachiman Gudokan, which provides detailed information on the Mongol invasion, places the landing site at Okinohama Beach, near the current Higashi Park in Hakata Ward, Fukuoka City. And this has long been the prevailing theory. However, examining the topography of Hakata Bay, the tip of Momochi-hama Beach, which juts out into the sea at that time, has many reefs and the water is shallow on the east side of Momochi-hama Beach, making it unnatural for a large ship to enter and anchor. Taken together with the records and reports of the warriors on the Japanese side, including the famous Moko Shirai Ekatoba by Takizaki Suenaga, we can assume that the Yuan forces invaded from Imazu on the west side of Hakata Bay and started to anchor and land on the west side of Momochi-hama Beach. Therefore, compared to the common theory, they are at a disadvantage in terms of overland distance, making it more difficult for them to capture the city of Hakata. The difficulty of landing and marching into Hakata Bay. Furthermore, even after that, the Yuan forces had many disadvantageous factors that are not mentioned in the common belief. In order to land 26,000 soldiers and 700 to 1,000 horses on the beach from a fleet of 300 ships, 30 landing craft would have to make at least 10 round trips between the fleet and the beach. Each round trip takes about an hour, so it would take 10 hours for everyone to land. If they landed at around 6 in the morning, it would be around 4 in the evening, and at this time of year, it was already starting to get dark. Since it would take a long time for all the troops to land, the Yuan forces had them advance sequentially, starting with the troops that had landed. However, due to the effects of seasickness, the Yuan forces had low physical and mental strength and insufficient war potential. So they had a hard time fighting against the Japanese army with excellent morale. In fact, contrary to popular belief, Japanese warriors rarely fought in single combat, and Japanese heavy bow cavalry repelled the Yuan forces' infantry by shooting in groups. The monsoon of the Genkai Sea and the time constraint caused by it. In addition, the Mongols were afraid of the northwesterly monsoon that began to blow in November of the lunar calendar. When this northwesterly monsoon begins to blow with the onset of winter, the Genkai Sea becomes very rough and navigation becomes very dangerous. Looking at the data for the same season around 2006, there were 59 days with a maximum wind speed of 10 meters or more between December 2006 and February 2007, and the maximum wind speed was 21 meters with strong winds. To return to the Korean peninsula from Kyushu, the wind and waves would be headwinds and headwaves, and the wind speed and wave height would be too high for the 30-meter class sailing ships of the time to navigate. According to the official history book of the Yuan Dynasty, History of Yuan Shi, the number of days for the return journey was almost double the number of days for the outward journey, which tells us how tough the voyage on the Genkai Sea was in the winter. With the changing of the seasons in November, the Yuan forces did not have enough time. As a matter of fact, in June, before the sortie of the Yuan forces, an unforeseen event occurred, the illness and death of King Wanjing of Goryeo. As a result, the invasion of Japan was postponed to October, delaying the departure for war by 3 months. Therefore, they had too short a period of time to carry out their mission. And this ultimately resonated as one of the decisive reasons for the Yuan forces' defeat. In the end, the Yuan forces decided that it was impossible to conquer Kyushu in a short period of time and withdrew its forces that day. After withdrawing to their ships, the Yuan forces decides to retreat back to their homeland. According to the history of Yuan Shi, it is written in few words, in the winter month, the Mongolian forces entered Japan and defeated it. However, the Mongolian forces was not in order and their arrows were exhausted, so they simply snatched the four borders and returned home. In the end, we can assume that the Yuan forces were forced to retreat early due to the difficulties they faced from landing to advancing, and the time limitations that forced them to hurry their retreat. This is roughly the truth behind the mystery of the overnight retreat of the Yuan forces. What were the war aims of the Yuan dynasty during the Battle of Bun'ei? There is a theory that the Battle of Bun'ei was not an invasion for the purpose of conquest, but a reconnaissance in force. In the military operations of the Mongol Empire, a full-scale invasion may be carried out after several reconnaissance in force with 100 to 10,000 troops in advance. For example, in diplomatic negotiations in the Mongol Empire, it is known that during the invasion of the Yuan Dynasty, a Jurchen dynasty in northern China, from the time of Genghis Khan to the time of Ogedei Khan, envoys were dispatched on several occasions to call for submission prior to or in parallel with military action. In such cases, the Mongol invasion sometimes resulted in the withdrawal of the army without territorial conquest, although plunder and engagement took place in the invaded areas. Also, according to the history of Yuan Shi, there's a description that the Yuan forces ran out of arrows during the Battle of Bun'ei. From this description, some people cite the fact that they were only prepared to the extent that they would soon run out of arrows, the main weapon of the time, and the fact that a force of about 30,000 men was not enough to conquer Japan is the basis for the theory that the Battle of Bun'ei was a reconnaissance in force. However, the number of Yuan soldiers deployed overseas other than in the war against Japan was about 12,000 in the operation to suppress the Sambiolcho rebellion, up to about 10,000 in the invasion of Sakhalin, and about 20,000 in the invasion of Java. These show that the number of Yuan soldiers in the Battle of Bun'ei was not less than in the invasions of other areas. On the other hand, there are no historical documents to support the reconnaissance purpose. According to the history of Yuan Shi, before the description of running out of arrows, there is a description of the reason for withdrawal as the government forces, Yuan army, are not in order. And there is a description of how the Yuan army decided to retreat after being disorganized in the battle with the Japanese army, but it does not say that the retreat was as planned. Also, according to the official history book of the Goryeo, the Goryeosa, History of Goryeo, Yuan's forces encountered stubborn resistance from the Japanese, and after considering the shortage of troops, General Holden, the commander-in-chief of Yuan's forces, decided to withdraw. This video ends here. The second Mongol invasion of Japan, the Battle of Koan in 1281, will be the focus of another video.